Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
I want to take you back to a specific moment in time. But first, I need you to visualize a sound, or, well, maybe the absence of one.
The silence.
Exactly, the silence. We're standing on the banks of the Susquehanna River, right on the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania. Normally, this is a loud place. You've got rushing water, currents, all the sounds of life on a river.
But not in March 1920. In March 1920, it was dead silent.
Because the river just wasn't moving. It was completely locked in place.
And we aren't talking about, a thin layer of skim ice you might see on a pond. This was a monolithic slab of ice stretching from shore to shore.
And it had been that way for, what was the number? 83 consecutive days?
83 days. That number is really the headline statistic of the winter of 1919-1920. It was a brutal, relentless season.
I can't even imagine.
To give you some context, for nearly 3 months, the lower Susquehanna had basically stopped being a river. It had, for all intents and purposes, become a glacier.
An 83-day freeze has to take a psychological toll. I mean,
Right.
You wake up in January, the river is a sheet of ice. You wake up in February, it's still frozen solid. Now it's March, and you can literally walk across it.
But that's the problem, isn't it? Spring is coming.
Right. And that's where the silence becomes absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, in the world of hydrology, a frozen river in March is wrap. It's a loaded gun. You've got all this snow melting up north in Pennsylvania, New York. That water has to go somewhere.
And it flows south.
It flows south, and it hits this massive, impenetrable cap of ice, and the pressure just starts to build and build.
So the towns along the river, specifically the sources mentioned, Port Deposit and Havre Grace, they're sitting ducks.
Completely.
Yeah.
They know that when this ice breaks, it's not going to be a gentle, quiet melt. It's going to be violent. The water levels are already rising behind this huge ice dam, and it's threatening to just wipe these towns right off the map.
So what do? The local authorities are staring down an absolute catastrophe.
And they tried all the usual methods. I mean, they were monitoring the water levels. They were sandbagging the low-lying areas. But the sheer volume of ice, it was totally unprecedented. They knew they had to break the jam before the floodwaters behind it just crushed them. And
this is where the story just goes completely off the rails. Because normally you'd expect them to call in more engineers, right? Maybe some, heavy machinery on the banks.
Something logical, something civil.
But they didn't do that. They made a phone call that honestly sounds like something a breathless screenwriter would pitch to a Hollywood studio.
They called the Army.
Specifically the Army Air Service.
Yes. They decided that the best way to handle this natural disaster was to declare war on it.
They literally declared war on the river. I mean, the plan was to launch an aerial bombardment campaign against the ice. It's insane.
It's one of the most unique intersections of meteorology, civil engineering desperation, and early aviation history that we have on record. It's just a wild story.
It sounds so absurd to our modern ears. The river's frozen. Okay, bomb it. But that is exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
And we have a fantastic stack of sources to work from.
We do. We've got records from the Susquehanna National Heritage Area, some great retrospective pieces from the Cecil Whig and the York Daily Record, and my personal favorite, the actual primary source newspaper clippings from March 1920.
Those clippings are amazing because they capture the raw confusion and, the awe of the moment. You have to remember, airplanes themselves were still a huge novelty to most people back then.
Just seeing one was an event.
Exactly. So seeing them used as tools of, civil engineering, it was completely mind-blowing for everyone watching.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this whole bizarre event. First, we need to understand the physics of it. Why was this ice jam so uniquely dangerous?
Then we have to look at the campaign itself. I mean, who is the guy who flies a biplane in freezing weather to drop TNT on a river?
And the big question, did any of it actually work?
Right. And to really get at the solution, the bombing, we have to start with the problem. We need to talk about the mechanics of an ice jam.
Yeah, because before I read all this, I just assumed an ice jam was, a lot of ice floating together. Like a Slurpee that got too thick or something.
It's significantly more complex and definitely more violent than slush. The sources are pretty clear in distinguishing between two main types of jams, and the difference is absolutely critical.
Okay, so what's the first type?
First, you have what's called a freeze-up jam. This happens early in the winter. The air temperature plummets, the water becomes super cooled, and you get what's called Brazil ice.
Brazil ice.
Yeah, they're like tiny needle-like crystals that form in turbulent water. They're very slushy. These little crystals start clumping together to form what look like floating pans or discs of ice.
Okay, I can picture that.
So as the river's flow slows down, either because of friction or it hits an obstacle like a bridge pier, these pans just stop moving. They jam together and freeze solid. That's what creates that first rough, jagged cover of ice.
So that's what happened back in December 1919 to kick this whole thing off. That was the start of the 83 days.
Correct. That creates the initial blockage. But the real monster, the one that actually threatens to destroy entire towns, that's the breakup jam. And that happens when the thaw begins.
Which is the exact scenario they're facing in March 1920.
Exactly. You get this perfect storm of conditions. In 1920, you had a sudden warm spell, and it was combined with heavy rains. So all that runoff starts pouring into the river system.
And the river level rises.
It rises rapidly. Now, imagine you have a solid lid of ice on a pot of boiling water. The pressure from the water flowing underneath physically pushes up on that massive ice sheet.
So the river is literally lifting this glacier.
It lifts it and it fractures it. So now you don't have one sheet of ice anymore. You have these giant, jagged chunks of ice, some the size of cars, some the size of small houses, and they're all moving downstream with this powerful current behind them.
That sounds terrifying.
And it is, because eventually those massive chunks hit a bottleneck. It could be a bridge pier, a narrow channel, a sharp bend in the river.
I just pile up.
We don't just pile up flat. The sources use the word shingle. One enormous slab of ice slides up and over another one, and then another one on top of that, until you have a literal wall of ice that acts as a dam.
A dam made of its own broken pieces.
Precisely. And the water behind it backs up almost instantly. The river level can rise several feet in just a matter of minutes.
The sources mention that ice jam flooding is often worse than, regular open water flooding. Is that why? Is it because it's just so sudden?
It's the speed and it's the sheer destructive force. In a normal flood, you get water damage, which is bad enough. In an ice jam flood, you get water damage plus thousands of tons of moving ice acting like battering rams.
Oh.
These blocks of ice can shear through 100-year-old trees. They can crush buildings like they're made of cardboard. They can take out bridge supports. And in 1920, the scale of this was just terrifying.
We mentioned the 83-day freeze, but let's talk about the thickness of this ice. The York Daily Record mentions a specific number that just stopped me in my tracks. They said the ice was up to 16 feet thick in some places.
16 feet. Let's just try to visualize that for a second. That is the height of a modest two-story house.
Or a semi-truck standing on its nose.
Right. I mean, we are not talking about a layer of ice that you can go skate on. We are talking about what is essentially a geological formation that is choking a major river.
And this wasn't just sitting there. This thing was plugging the flow of the Susquehanna, which drains a massive portion of the East Coast. All that water is piling up behind this 16-foot wall.
And historically, people on the river were used to ice. They even used to harvest it. It was called a winter crop for ice boxes back before modern refrigeration.
So they saw it as a resource.
They did. But this was completely different. This wasn't a crop. This was a monster that had grown far beyond any human control. The pressure building behind that 16-foot wall was just immense.
So let's put ourselves in their shoes. You're the Mayor of Port Deposit. You look out your window and you see this 16-foot high wall of jagged ice. The water is rising behind it. You know that when that wall inevitably breaks, your entire town is going to be underwater, or worse, crushed.
And you need to break that wall, but you can't get close to it. It's unstable. You can't put men or machines on it.
So what do?
You make a call to the United States Army, specifically to a Colonel H.W. Scull of the Aberdeen Proving Ground.
Now, Aberdeen isn't far from there, geographically. And it's a weapons testing facility, right?
Right. And that context is absolutely vital here. Where in 1920, World War I had only ended in late 1918. You have a military establishment that is still very much in a wartime mindset.
They've got all this new tech.
All this new technology, specifically aircraft and high explosives, and they're looking for ways to use it to prove its value.
It's the classic, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail scenario.
Precisely. Colonel Scull didn't look at that ice jam and see a civil engineering problem. He saw a target. His proposal was to use Army airplanes to drop heavy ordnance bombs directly onto the ice gorges.
And the pilots, I love the way the sources describe them. They said they were flying like air raiders on the French front. They were treating the Susquehanna River like a battlefield in Europe.
In many ways, it was an experiment. We have to remember that aerial bombing, especially precision bombing, was in its absolute infancy. This was a live fire test they wanted to see. Can we actually hit a specific point on a river from a moving plane?
And if we hit it, what happens?
What happens to the ice? What happens to the shockwave? This was as much about data collection for the military as it was about disaster relief.
So who volunteers for a mission like this? Hey, it's March. It's freezing cold. The air is turbulent, and we need you to go fly this plane made of canvas and wire over a jagged ice field and drop dynamite on it.
Well, we actually have the name of the man who led the charge, a Lieutenant Rene R. Studler.
I loved the description of him in the Cecil wig. He sounds like a character straight out of a pulp novel.
He really does. A man with a prominent mustache who is apparently rarely seen without his pipe.
A classic flyboy.
Absolutely. And he wasn't a rookie. He had earned his wings during the 1918-1919 period. He was the operations officer for the 258th Heavy Bombardment Squadron.
The Heavy Bombardment Squadron. That sounds pretty serious.
It was. They were later redesignated as Flight B of the 14th Squadron. Their entire day job was testing aerial weaponry at Aberdeen Proving Ground. So Studler was arguably the most qualified person in the entire region to figure out how to blow something up from the air.
Let's talk about the plane for a second. The outline mentions they were using de Havilland bombing planes. For those of us who aren't aviation buffs, what are we looking at here? What kind of machine is this?
We're talking about the DH-4. It was a British design, but it was the only American-made aircraft to actually see combat in World War I. It's a biplane. So two wings, one stacked on top of the other. The frame is mostly wood, covered in fabric, and the whole thing is held together with bracing wires.
So not exactly an armored vehicle.
Not at all. It had a powerful Liberty engine that was famously loud, but these planes were nicknamed the Flaming Coffins by pilots during the war.
The Flaming Coffin. Why?
Because the main fuel tank was located directly between the pilot's seat and the observer's seat in the back. If it took a hit, the results were, well, you can imagine.
That's comforting. And the cockpit is open to the air, right?
Completely open to the elements. So just imagine flying at 80 or 90 miles per hour in March over a frozen river. The wind chill would have been absolutely brutal.
Studler and his observer would have been bundled up in heavy leather flight suits, goggles, scarves, the whole kit.
And Studler probably still had that pipe clenched between his teeth.
Knowing the pilots of that era, I would not be surprised at all.
It was a different breed of person.
So the stage is set. It's Tuesday, March 9th, 1920. The first mission is a go. And this wasn't some secret military operation. The whole world, or at least the whole county, was watching this happen.
Oh, it was a massive spectator event. A spectacle. The sources describe crowds of people lining the riverbanks and, incredibly, standing on the bridges that weren't immediately threatened.
People treated it like an air show.
They absolutely did. You have to put yourself in their shoes. Seeing an airplane at all in 1920 was still a rare and exciting thing for many people. Seeing one drop bombs, that was once-in-a-lifetime stuff.
There's this one description from the Evening Sun that's almost poetic. They wrote that Studler's plane would circle the target, spiral upward until it looked no larger than an eagle, and then it would just swoop down for the attack.
And that dive is crucial. This wasn't high-altitude bombing with some sophisticated bomb sight. This was visual bombing. He had to physically point the nose of the plane at the ice to have any hope of accuracy, release the ordnance, and then pull up hard before hitting the debris or, the bridge itself.
All while flying a flaming coffin made of wood and fabric.
And he was doing it on a 17-minute loop. He'd take off from Aberdeen, fly to the river, drop 4 bombs, fly back, reload, and do it all over again. A flying assembly line of destruction.
Let's get to the munitions. The arsenal, they didn't exactly start small, did they?
No, they experimented with a range of options. The sources say they started with 112-pound bombs, then they moved up to 230-pounders. They even tried some 250-pound bombs that were apparently less successful.
But the situation was getting more dire.
It was, so they brought out the heavy hitters. 500-pound TNT bombs.
500 pounds. That is a quarter of a ton of high explosive in a single bomb.
It's a massive amount of energy. To put it in perspective, in the trench warfare of World War I, a 500-pound bomb was designed to destroy heavily fortified concrete bunkers. Dropping that on a river is, let's just say it's aggressive.
There is one moment in the Cecil Wig account that honestly feels unbelievable. It describes the first drop of one of these big bombs. It says, a passenger train was passing over the bridge at that exact moment.
I read that 3 or 4 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Yes, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Bridge was still active. A passenger train was literally chugging across while this was happening.
Can you just imagine being a passenger on that train? You're in your suit, you're reading the morning paper, maybe you're heading to a business meeting in Philadelphia, you glance out the window.
And below you, a biplane is diving at the river and releasing a 500-pound bomb.
And then, just moments later, a geyser of water and ice shoots higher than the bridge you're on. The passengers likely felt the vibration, the shockwave, before they even processed what they were seeing.
The source notes that the train just kept moving. It wasn't in any real danger, strictly speaking, but that juxtaposition of the totally mundane daily commute with this violent military operation is just so jarring.
So the bomb hits, 500 pounds of TNT. It looks like a Hollywood explosion, a big fireball.
No, and that's because of the physics of the target. When a bomb penetrates ice or goes into the water before it detonates, you don't really get a fireball, you get something called the tamping effect.
Tamping.
Yeah, the water and the ice basically contain the initial blast, which directs all that explosive energy into a massive shockwave through the water.
Which is actually much better for breaking ice.
Far better. It creates a hydrostatic shock. It lifts the entire ice sheet from below and shatters it over a huge area. The witnesses describe the sound as a muffled roar rather than a sharp crack.
But visually,
it was spectacular. They reported columns of water, mud, and splintered ice shooting 100 feet into there.
100 feet. That's a 10-story building made of river debris.
And one report says that first big blast tore a hole 400 feet in diameter in the jam. It literally vaporized and shattered a section of the river longer than a football field.
But when you release that kind of raw energy, it goes everywhere. It doesn't just stay neatly in the river. We have to talk about the collateral damage.
To oops factor, absolutely. When you detonate 500 pounds of TNT, that shockwave doesn't just travel through the water. It also travels through the air. And the most immediate victims, it seems, were the local wildlife.
The poor ducks.
The ducks. The lower Susquehanna is a major migratory flyway. The reports say that after the first big explosion, the air turned black with wildfowl. Thousands of ducks, terrified by the concussion, all took flight at the exact same moment.
It must have been a chaotic scene. Biplanes, bombs, and a giant cloud of panicked birds.
But it wasn't just the birds. There were people nearby who were affected.
Right, the watchtower.
There was a watchtower on the Perryville Railroad Bridge. Inside, there were watchmen, presumably just doing their jobs, keeping an eye on the rail traffic. The concussion from one of those 500-pound bombs hit that tower.
And this wasn't shrapnel or debris hitting it. This was just the air pressure.
Pure air pressure. A wave of force. It shattered the glass windows of the tower, spraying the watchmen inside with shards of glass.
That is absolutely terrifying. You're sitting in your little tower thinking you're safe and sound, and suddenly the windows just explode inward for no apparent reason.
It really shows the radius of that blast. And even further downstream, on Garrett Island, there were men getting their fish houses ready for the upcoming season. They reported feeling the concussions physically miles away from the impact point.
It really underscores that this wasn't some kind of precision surgery. This was blunt force trauma applied to the entire landscape.
Absolutely.
So they're pounding the river, they're shattering windows, they are scaring every duck in the state of Maryland. The big question is, did it work? Did the bombs actually break the ice jam?
This is where the story gets really nuanced and interesting. If you just look at the newspaper headlines from March 10th and 11th, they're completely contradictory.
What did I say?
One paper runs a headline, "Bombs break up ice gorges." Sounds like a success. But then another one says, "Ice jam impregnable against air bombing."
Impregnable. That's a very strong word.
It is, and it reflects the deep frustration that was setting in on the ground. Because here's the fundamental problem with bombing an ice jam. You can break the ice, yes. Studler and his squadron were very successful in blasting enormous holes in it. But breaking the ice doesn't make it disappear. It's still there. It's just in smaller, albeit still huge, pieces.
And if the channel downstream is still clogged up.
Exactly. Then those smaller pieces just float down 100 yards and get stuck all over again. The experts on the ground at the time noted that the ice refused to follow the channels. It would break apart, move a little bit, and then immediately back up against the islands and the bridge piers.
It's like plunging a toilet. You can break up the initial obstruction, but if the pipe further down is still too narrow, you're really just moving the mess around.
That is a very apt, if slightly unglamorous, analogy.
Yes. The river was so choked with that 16-foot thick ice that there was simply no room for all the debris to flow out.
So for 2 straight days, March 9th and 10th, It really looked like a failure.
It did. They were throwing thousands of pounds of high explosives at this river, and the water levels in Port Deposit weren't dropping fast enough. The threat was still there. It looked like nature was winning. So the whole bombing campaign was arguably a bust, at least initially. But then comes Friday, March 12th.
March 12th is the turning point. On that day, the gorge finally broke. The massive accumulation of ice, this whole dam, it began to move. It started grinding its way past Port Deposit and out into the Chesapeake Bay. The town was saved.
So is that because of the bombs? Or was it just a lucky break with the weather?
Well, it's the subject of some debate, even in the sources. But the general consensus is that it was a combination of both.
Okay.
They had dropped over 5,000 pounds of explosives in total on that jam. That undoubtedly weakened its structural integrity. It must have created thousands of fracture lines and weak points throughout the ice.
So the bombing sort of softened it up, tenderized it.
Right. But on the 12th, they also got a crucial assist from nature. The weather moderated slightly, which helped, but the big thing was the tides in the Chesapeake Bay. The powerful incoming and outgoing tides exert a huge push-pull force on the river mouth.
Ah, so it's pulling from one end.
It's pulling from one end while the river is pushing from the other. The combination of the structural damage from all that TNT and the natural tidal pull was finally enough to dislodge the entire mass.
So the unthinkable solution, while not a magic bullet, actually did contribute to the win. Port Deposit was probably very wet, but it wasn't destroyed.
It was saved from the worst-case scenario. By the evening of the 12th, the river was reportedly clear from Port Deposit all the way to the bay for the first time since December. The war was officially over.
Now, I want to zoom out a bit. We're looking at this from over a century away, and over that time, some weird myths have sprung up around this specific event. The Cecil Wigg article from 2014 mentions a really persistent local rumor that involves Hurricane Agnes.
Ah, yes. Hurricane Agnes in 1972. A devastating flood event in its own right. If you talk to old-timers in that area, you might hear a story that during the 72 floods, the Army had planes lined up on the tarmac ready to go bomb the Conowingo Dam.
Which sounds completely insane. You're going to bomb a massive hydroelectric dam to try and stop a flood.
It would be catastrophic. It makes no sense. But the rumor persists. And what seems to have happened is that people's memories have conflated two different dramatic events.
A remix of local disasters.
Exactly. They remembered the famous story of the river being bombed in 1920, and they just sort of mentally pasted it onto the panic and chaos of the 1972 flood.
It's a powerful story, so it sticks around.
It is, but there is a crucial geographical and historical detail that completely debunks the 72 rumor immediately. In 1920, the Conowingo Dam didn't exist.
Right. It hadn't even been built yet.
Not even close.
Right.
Construction was completed in 1928. So in 1920, the lower Susquehanna was still a wild, untamed, undammed river. And that's why the ice jams could get so severe. The water flowed freely until it hit a natural obstruction.
Today, the dam controls the flow.
Completely. The dam regulates the flow, and it also catches a lot of the upstream ice before it can ever pile up that badly downstream. The very existence of the dam changes the physics of the river.
Which makes the 1920 event even more of a historical anomaly.
It does, and it brings us to another interesting comparison. We have these amazing photos from 1945 of another bad ice jam. There's a particular photo of a local man named Luther S. Smith, and he's standing next to these huge ice chunks that have been pushed up onto River Road.
And those chunks were big.
Oh, they were impressive. The sources say they were about 6 feet thick, which is a lot of ice. But then you compare that to 1920.
16 feet versus 6 feet.
It's not even in the same league. It really shows just how anomalous that winter of 1920 was. It was a weather event that for that region we effectively don't see anymore.
And why don't we see it? Is it just because of the dam?
The dam certainly plays a major role in preventing the jams from getting that bad. But the bigger factor, according to the experts cited in our sources, is the climate itself. We simply do not get the sustained deep freeze winters required to build up 16 feet of solid river ice in Maryland anymore.
That 83-day consecutive freeze, it's a relic of a past climate.
It likely is, yes. And that creates what you could call a lost danger or a kind of historical amnesia. Modern residents look at the Susquehanna in the winter, and they see a beautiful, maybe slightly slushy river.
Right.
It's very difficult for us, to imagine it as this solid, destructive force that's capable of crushing a bridge or wiping out a town.
We've lost our institutional fear of the river because the river itself has fundamentally changed.
And because we've engineered our way around it with dams and flood controls. But looking back at 1920, it's a powerful reminder of just how fragile that control really is when nature decides to throw a real haymaker.
It also changes how I think about the people of that era. We tend to think of them in these sepia tones, living slower, simpler lives. But here they are, strapping TNT to biplanes and flying combat missions against a force of nature.
It was an incredibly bold, almost reckless era of problem solving. There was this pervasive belief that technology, and specifically military technology left over from the war, could solve almost anything. If the river is a problem, shoot the river.
If the river is a problem, shoot the river. That might just be the quote of this entire deep dive.
It really encapsulates the mindset. It was crude, it was loud, and it broke a lot of innocent windows. But it also showed a desperate willingness to use every single tool available to protect those communities.
And it leaves us with such a vivid final image. Lieutenant Rene R. Studler, mustache perfectly groomed, pipe in his mouth, wrestling the stick of a de Havilland biplane.
While a passenger train full of commuters chugs along right beneath him, completely oblivious to the 500-pound bomb that's falling through the sky towards the river.
You really cannot write fiction that is better or stranger than that reality.
Not at all.
So here is where I kind of want to land the plain pun definitely intended. We look at this as a quirky, fascinating history story. But I want you to think about the core dynamic here. It's man versus nature. Nature creates what seems like an impregnable problem.
And man responds with overwhelming brute force.
Exactly. And unintended consequences inevitably follow.
They always do.
We solved the flood risk, well, sort of. But in the process, we terrified the local ecosystem and we shattered civilian infrastructure.
It raises a really provocative question for you listening today. We are living in an era of increasingly extreme weather. We have superstorms, atmospheric rivers, mega droughts.
So if we faced a threat like that today, some impregnable force of nature that was bearing down on a major city, what would be our modern version of dropping TNT from a biplane?
That's a great question. Would we try to geoengineer our way out of it? Would we try seeding clouds or building massive seawalls? Would we use some other form of brute force? And crucially, what would be the modern equivalent of the shattered watchtower glass?
What's the collateral damage we're willing to accept to try and force nature to bend to our will?
We might have better computers and more data than Colonel Skull did in 1920, but I'm not entirely sure we have any more wisdom. When you decide to fight nature with brute force, nature usually gets the last at bat.
That is definitely something to chew on. From the frozen banks of the 1920 Susquehanna to the pipe-smoking pilots who tried to blow it all up, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
It was a pleasure. A truly wild story.
Stay curious, watch out for falling ice, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.